Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Planet Sky FF. James and I are still recording this podcast, which means that nobody won £50,000. Well, somebody won £50,000, but it wasn't us. Sky Fantasy Football, first season, done and dusted, James.
No, I mean, obviously, it definitely wasn't us, mate. That goes as standard. Who was the winner? It was. I will tell you. No, I won't tell you. I know that the Hub guys announced him live Sunday night, which was super cool. I forget his name. I'll find him. It's an Irish guy, wasn't it? I think. Is it Liam? Liam Doran? That name seems to ring a bell.
Nice. Where did you finish in the end, James?
Liam Dorian, sorry. Got it.
Dorian.
Well done, Liam. Congratulations. Beer anytime you like, mate.
On him, obviously. He's got 50 grand.
I mean, listen, he's won 50 grand. I want him to be my mate. I'll buy him the first one.
Where did you finish in the end, James?
277th.
That's not bad. That's a big little jump up from your 400 odd spot that you were at.
Yeah, I didn't dip below 400, I don't think, from around about game week 32 or 30. Or we have to say match day 32 or 33, I think. In the end, a little tinge of disappointment that I wasn't really able to make a sustained push for top 100, because I think there was a point where it was looking like it was on, and then certain things went against me, like Kane in at the wrong time and then out at the wrong time, and then not being able to get Sterling and Sunku's red card. But everyone's got them little stories. I can't complain. The final day was pretty good for me in the sense that I got 95 points even though I didn't captain De Bruyne, which unusually for Sky, obviously this is basically a single game day for everybody, isn't it? There's only one captain you can have. I'd captained Jesus, so it wasn't the worst. Nice return from VVD, who'd been hanging about in the team. So wasn't too bad at all. So I had a little jump on the final day, which I think's all you can really ask for. And it was nice to finish inside the top 300 because I hadn't really gone much beyond that. So happy. Certainly some things learnt in the final, let's say, weeks of the season. Perhaps regrets on Foden, for example, and not just spreading that to a different player, which would have saved me the transfer. But at the time, it just felt like get as much City and United as you can. So no regrets.
How many points did you get, James?
Oh, Jesus, that's a tester.
Sorry, I'm asking you a difficult question. I know it's going to be 3,000 and something.
What I can say is I was 200 points behind Liam, who won it. Liam got 3,342. I finished on 3,143.
3,143 divided by, and in FPL, James, you got 2,244, which means that you got 40% more points in Sky than you did in FPL.
Standard.
Looking at mine. Mine was much less, 20%. But obviously, I'm not. My Sky record isn't one that you can hold as an example of what could or should happen. So let's assume that your ratio is correct. That means that in Sky next season, I'm going to be aiming to score 40% more points, in an ideal world, 50% more points than I will in FPL. Obviously, the better I do in FPL, the harder. But we are now saying an average game week in Sky, in FPL, if that was 60, then you're looking for about 85 a week in Sky to be able to get yourself up into that top 100.
Go on, just quick fag packet maths then. What did we say Liam finished on? Was it 2, 3, 4, 3?
3, 3, 4,
Sorry,
2.
3, 3, 4, 2. Divide that by 38, please.
87.
There you go.
Yeah. So 85 points a week, and you'll be there or thereabouts.
Now, it's worth saying there are more weeks than 38. Think of the split game week, for example. But then you've also got certain weeks where you got 2 match days within one set of 7 days, for example. So I think 38 weeks probably works out about right, for example. I think, you probably want to be looking at average for a match day, certainly in the 80s, to have a chance of winning it, I think, as an average. And you're going to have some weeks where you're going to be sort of 150 or so. You're going to have some weeks where you're going to drop at about 50 or so. So as an average, I think that's roughly where you want to be. I'm sure when Dan won it, and I might be wrong, Dan hit me up and let me know what your average was. But I think Dan, when he won it, was high 70s average, I think.
Okay, so it's gone up a little bit. Yeah.
Might have, but then some of the points have changed since Dan won it, for example, as well. In terms of the extra you want from Sky to FPL, yeah. I mean, of course you do. If you take the example of, say, Virgil van Dijk, who was the second highest scorer in Sky,
17 points this game week.
268 points in Sky. Whereas if you compare him to his Liverpool teammates in FPL, then he's not even the second highest Liverpool scorer.
Yeah.
Defensively, he's only the fifth highest scorer for Liverpool in FPL. So you've got 178 points in FPL compared to 268 in Sky. Now, suddenly for someone like him, you're looking at a 50% increase. But then say Kevin De Bruyne, who only scored 5 more points than Van Dijk in Sky, he's only picked up about, just looking out, 32 more points in Sky than FPL. So for him, his increase from Sky on top of FPL is around about 10%. That's going to vary from player to player, for example.
There are other things to chuck into the mix, which I'll touch on one, and then we'll politely sidestep. For example, VVD in FPL is a £6 million asset. Kevin De Bruyne is a £9.5 million asset. So there's a 50% price difference there. Whereas in Sky, 10.6, 10.5 versus 11.2 is a much smaller gap. So the pricing of defenders, when they know they can get these tier points, has made them more expensive, which is interesting. But before we get into a lot of the differences in scoring and what have you, it's worth letting all of you guys know that if you haven't played Sky before but have been tempted to or are now dabbling in, next week we will be doing a full rundown on Sky Fantasy Football, the tier points, the changes in the pricing, if there is anything to explain there, the transfers and how the transfer system works, overhauls, and all of that kind of stuff. So next week we'll give you a good rundown on the differences.
The Sky for Dummies, or as I've now decided to call it, to be respectful to people, an introduction to Sky.
Sky for FPL players.
Well, I guess in a lot of ways, yeah, Sky for FPL players.
Yeah, I mean, so often when we explain the rules of Sky, we do it with a comparison of FPL. It's like, you do this in FPL, but you do this in Sky, as opposed to treating Sky as its standalone game. But before we, so that's going to be coming next week. It's not like you can play the game in the next week or so or pick your team anyway. So there's no rush or urgency. You'll have plenty of time to listen to that. And today we're going to go through some Twitter questions, James, that people have sent through as an end of season wrap up.
Before we do, did you use your fucking transfers, mate?
Not the ones on the last day of the season.
Oh my Lord. Really?
I was too busy watching your stream, James, trying to think about last minute teammates.
Talking about, my stream finished at 3:10.
I got 80.
Yeah, till 4:00.
Oh, I was drinking. I got 80 points in the last week, which is not bad. De Bruyne, Van Dijk, Martial, and Fernandes were the bulk of my points. Wan-Bissaka did okay as well. And I finished inside the top 20k, so it's fine. It is what it is.
Do I need to message you every day there is football to say Sky?
Probably.
Fine, I will.
Let's see if that helps next season. Before we get into the Twitter questions, which I haven't read, and there's every chance that question I am going to ask you might be in one of those. So with FPL, at the end of the season, there is always a discussion around rule changes and tweaks to the game. The size of the Sky community is a lot smaller.
Yeah.
But I never hear talk of that or any changes to it.
I think the number one thing that the guys would probably like changed next year is probably man of the matches.
Okay.
Because the man of the match awards quite often feels like it's plucked out of the sky and given to the player that has the biggest ownership from a given match. That's how it feels quite often.
Is it not based on who is awarded the man of the match by the Sky pundits, commentators, whatever?
If the game is live on Sky, then generally, yes, it will probably be given to whoever they give the man of the match to on Sky. Anything that's not live on Sky is up for strange ones. If you take the Jimenez one at Villa the other week, I say the other week, it's about a month ago now, isn't it? When he set up Johnny's goal. And he did play quite well. But Dendoncker was given the man of the match by BT. And I think he'd scored the winning goal. And in terms of his overall display during that game, I don't think anybody would have argued that as a choice in terms of he deserved man of the match. You get the report, Jimenez is man of the match. That's how it feels quite often with the man of the matches. So I think generally just scrap that would be the best thing to do. Scrap the man of the match. But it's another one which kind of relates to, in a sense, a little bit like FPL, that the game makers want people to score high points, keep interest. We know a lot of people drop out of Sky, right? I don't know the statistics for dead teams at the end, but I would bet at the end of the season, you've probably, from what started, got, 80 to 90% dead teams, quite possibly going into the final day of the season, particularly this year with the shutdown. And the reason the man of the match award is also really frustrating is one of the things I think you and I both really like about Sky is the tiering points. There is general statistical data that helps decide. It's just fact, isn't it? If you pick up 3 shots on target, you're in tier 2 for shots. We just know it. It's clear as day for everybody to know. Whereas the BPS in FPL is obviously extremely frustrating in terms of the way it works out. So then the man of the match kind of throws it back out as a bit of a lottery. And I think that's the frustrating thing, because otherwise the way Sky works as a game is absolutely brilliant. And that's the one thing I think people would really like to change. The other thing from personal is, obviously going back to our chat with Paul, Sky player in FPL before we started last year, was coming into this season and really believing people like Rodri, Jorginho, Fabinho, Wilfred and Diddy were going to be really good Sky assets.
Yeah.
None of them have shown through, in spite of the fact that you look at Rodri hits passing tier nearly every time he plays for Man City. You wouldn't get him at the sort of price he is. So they either need to do one or two things. They either need to manipulate something, I think, to make them players attractive again, or what would be better is just price them a lot fucking cheaper.
Yeah.
Because it's too expensive. You're not going to go and buy players like Rodri and Jorginho at 10 million when they're hardly ever going to get you attacking returns. You've got other good assets from them particular clubs. And also when you know that people are going to break out at a lower value, like say Mason Mount did very early in the season, or Jack Grealish later in the season, or Adama Traore at stages. So these guys I never owned any of them type of players. So I would like something that makes them players interesting again next season, because we always shout about it being bad in FPL, that we can never, no matter, N'Golo Kante would be 4 million, fine, you'd get him, but he'd just sit on your bench. You'd never play the guy, right?
Yeah.
In this, you've got no subs, you want 11 starters. I'd like these guys to be attractive again. I really thought, the one I thought definitely was going to be like Jorginho, was going to be super attractive. And admittedly, Chelsea changed style this year from going from what they had last year with Maurizio Sarri to Frank Lampard this year. These guys just never became attractive. So I'd like them to be a lot cheaper next year.
Okay. Should we answer some of these Twitter questions, James? Let's do it.
Or just make the other guys super expensive. Like, you know me, I don't care if they make Bruno Fernandes 14 million. You know that. Yeah. I mean, whatever price Sky give him, he's still going in the fucking team. We can tell you that now.
So Lee Williams.
It's about a certainty.
Fantasy FF threesome. KDB and Fernandes, will they both be in your starting team no matter the price next season?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
just the consistency of them is unbeatable.
I just can't really see them going much higher. To be honest, I think you can probably add, the way it is now, since they recovered from that period of slacking of clean sheets in the first half of the season, I think you can almost add Van Dijk onto that as well. Virgil van Dijk has been the highest scoring player in this game this season. 5 points less than Kevin De Bruyne. Just think about that for a sec. That's mad. And of course, the one reason why De Bruyne hasn't got a huge number more points in Sky to FPL is he rarely hits the tiering. Rarely hits the passing tier. Rarely hits shot tier. Rarely hits tackle tier. He doesn't need to. He's kind of an anomaly to the game in that sense, whereas even Bruno quite often is hitting like shot tiers, for example.
Yeah.
De Bruyne doesn't hit many tiering. Van Dijk obviously is the complete flip. he basically starts at a base rate of about 4 points per appearance. Is how it works out. I'm sure roughly that's how it would work out. If you remove all his clean sheets, assists, and the odd goal, just on tiering, he would start at about 4 points per game. So I think you throw him in. They were priced last year. De Bruyne was 11.2, Van Dijk 10.5. We know Bruno come in cheaper than certainly what he's going to be next year. The highest priced player last year was Salah at 12.2. If you're asking me generally, I think those three players should be a lot more than that.
We've got Lee Bishop. Simple question here, James. Will you have 2 teams next season?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I certainly have a plan what I want to do with the second team, which I'll talk about a bit more nearer the start of the season. But my intention is essentially to set it up as basically dead and try and win the cup with it. That's my. But in terms of one team to try and win the overall league, then no, I would be looking at one team. But of course, if that cup team hangs in quite well, and probably what I'd be looking at with that is generally one player per club for the second team to give me as much captaincy coverage. And I would, if someone gets injured for a month, I will transfer them out. It's not just leaving it completely dead, but to go into the cup period with as many transfers as possible. And then, of course, if I get into the second half of the season and I'm at 35 transfers left and it's in the top 10k or something, then it's all on, isn't it? So it's something I'm going to try next year.
For me, it's like if you have 2 teams, you need to have 2 teams for a reason, because inevitably your mind will gravitate towards both those teams becoming particularly similar. So if the strategy is have one team that you play it safe and one team that you play aggressive, I'm all for that. If the strategy is like you just mentioned, I actually really like what you just said there. Keep one team for the cup and one team for keep transfers back. So what I'll probably do is, in my mind, know the criteria for Team A, which will be the main team, and I'll actively manage, and criteria for Team B. And I'm probably going to follow that same idea that you've got there, James, in set it up for the cup. I'll probably still make transfers as I'm going along, but not as many.
If there's someone in that team who's only playing one every 3 games or so, I'm going to transfer it out. I'm not leaving it for the sake of it. There's points to be had, go and get them. But generally speaking, I'm not going to be in a position where I go, say if I've got Salah and Mane and I think, or one or the other, and I say, oh, Salah's really outperforming Mane now, I better switch that. I wouldn't. That's what I'm saying. I'll just leave it dead. Yeah. What a lot of the guys do with the 2 teams, obviously, is set one up as a main team. And a lot of guys will take more punts, for example, in their second team. And the objective, obviously, is to try and win the 50 grand with either team. But they treat one as very serious. That's the A team, if you will, and the B team more punts. What I don't like about that, and one of the things I hear people do when they have 2 teams, is they'll have, say they have De Bruyne in both teams, which is quite conceivable, for example. And the B team's got Sterling as well. They think, oh, I don't want to put all my eggs in the same basket. I'll go Sterling as captain in my B team. At least then I'm happy if one of them returns. If you think De Bruyne's the best, go De Bruyne in both. That's one thing I'd really strongly advise is go all in, go for it or go home. The splitting of I'll be happy if one returns and the other doesn't in either team. I think that's consciously you're trying to keep yourself in a happy place rather than doing the best you can at fantasy football.
Team. Agree.
Yeah, that's how I would feel about that.
FPL Dron UK Darren, right? If I'm correct.
Yes, Darren. Yeah.
This question is a next week question, I'm afraid, Darren. Any advice for a new starter? I think you have 40 transfers, can change between games and captains. Correct. Next week will be your rundown, buddy. We will go through everything for new starters. So just basically stay tuned for that and you'll get a proper answer to that question.
It won't so much be tips next week. Probably depends how we are for time. The A thing we want to do next week is define the differences, even from point scoring to how many goals a defender gets versus FPL, just make that nice and clear as a starting point. In terms of tips, we're not going to have the game launch this time next week. So there's only so much advice we can give.
Yeah.
What I would say is in terms of referring to, say, that B team idea of mine of 11 different clubs being used for that dead team, I wouldn't go down that route in the first 4 game weeks if that's when the overhaul's in the same place. It won't be necessary. it might be that you only need the coverage of 6 teams to cover you the captaincy, for example. So how you plan for game week 1 up until that forced first overhaul will be very different from what you do from, say, match day 5. Plus, we obviously also at this stage think there's a strong possibility that Man City, Man United and Wolves, apologies Chelsea fans, won't play in game week 1. That's a strong possibility. You're looking at the possibility at the moment, if they get to Champions League or Europa League respectively semi-finals, you're looking at a strong possibility of them not playing game week 1. Should any of them get to the final, you're looking at them possibly not playing in game week 2 either.
Yeah.
So then from an overhaul perspective, or what you do in the first 4 game weeks, if it's in the same period, you're not going to start with any Manchester City players. But if in games 3 and 4, they've got, I don't know, West Brom and Aston Villa, for example, you're going to fucking want some of it. So you're definitely not going to be going in dead to the overhaul, which was my plan last season, for example. You're going to need or want to get something in. If suddenly De Bruyne and Fernandes are reappearing in game week 3, and it's for 2 game weeks, there's going to be a big decision to make. Until we know the fixtures, we can't really advise on that at all.
So, James, this is a question coming in from, I should have moved away from the question, asker. FPL Wilson, sorry. Lee Jackson did ask a question, what's the biggest lesson you've learned so far? We're going to save all of those to the end and just summarize the best advice and what we've learned in one. But FPL Wilson says, what's the best formation to use? Go.
It's going to depend on pricing next year. Much of this year, I think most of us wanted 1 or 2 in midfield, and therefore that leads to probably a 4-3-3. It could be the way it drops next season that's completely different. I suspect the game makers might be quite aware of that, and you might see a lot of midfielders, perhaps people like Jack Grealish, for example, who I know didn't finish the season well, but we maybe would expect a big jump in. Perhaps the jump might not be quite what we expect. Perhaps people like, if Richarlison's still classified as a midfielder, might be more accessible, for example, because of Fernandes and De Bruyne. There's very much until you see the pricing, there's no
so James
right or wrong. But I generally, I'll probably lean into that at the moment.
4-3-3 is the correct answer. And I'll tell you why.
Okay, go on.
From the top 15 point scorers in the game, how many were midfielders?
1.
2.
De Bruyne and Richarlison.
De Bruyne and Richarlison.
Yeah.
How many were strikers?
Probably about 6 or 7.
Over half, James. Sterling, Rashford, Martial, Jimenez, Ings, Aubameyang, Mane, Vardy, Salah.
So 9.
Yeah, there's quite a few there.
Yeah.
And then you've got Van Dijk and Trent, and Robertson are the only defenders in there, and then a handful of goalkeepers. So it really goes to show of the top 15 point scorers dominated by strikers. You could then say followed by defenders, but that's basically Liverpool, followed by Liverpool defence, and then followed by everybody else. So
I
the other option is Mane, Salah, any of these guys move back into midfielders to beef up the options in midfield potentially?
No, they won't change it.
No?
No, he'll stay as forwards. I'm pretty. You've even got Sterling as a forward, haven't you? So
in the top 20,
I don't see them changing it.
Point scorers, James, in the whole game, you've got De Gea, Dubravka, Ederson, Kasper Schmeichel, Patricio, Nick Pope, Dean Henderson.
Yeah.
Goalkeepers score a lot of points in this as well. You can't play 2 in answer to the formation question.
You might find that a lot of them are quite a bit more expensive next year to flip it on its head. So we were quite blessed this year to have the likes of particularly Dean Henderson, and then obviously very late in the season and at other periods, Nick Pope, at what for Sky is an extremely cheap price of around about 6.5. You got to remember, and we talk about this next week a bit, that like your average spend per player in FPL is basically 6.6 million. In Sky, it's 9.9 million because you've only got to pick 11 players, right? So you think, Richarlison's 10.2, for example. Actually, it's about average. The getting in of the 3 or the 4 cheap guys, like nearly all of us had Suyuncu during the course of the season at 6.2, for example. These guys then facilitate the extra jump up to the guys at 11.5, 12.2 and that kind of thing. And I think some of these keepers you might find are quite a bit more expensive last year, because I don't know about usage, but going into this season, the general consensus for most people seems to be go to premium goalkeeper. And looking at it, going sort of, okay, right, so Nick Pope, I think Gator might have been one we was looking at quite early, was also quite cheap. But those sort of value between 6.4, 6.7 up to Edison and Allison at sort of 8 or 7.8, whatever they were.
7.98 they were.
Yeah, it felt like just pay the extra. But then with the added save tiers that these keepers were getting this year, it really did lean to go into one of these cheaper guys. Plus, they cover you from a captaincy perspective as well. So I think a lot of these guys you'll find to be a lot more expensive next season. That said, Edison's had a couple of 11s over the last few game weeks by doing not a lot. He got 11 points against Norwich at the weekend. That's, I mean, it's monster, isn't it? Really, as a base rate. You would have been looking at the weekend if you needed a guaranteed captaincy to return over the weekend. We'd have all sat there and gone, Edison, guaranteed 9 points. And even against Norwich, he's picked up 11. So,
and you've just answered Rob Pick's question. I remember you guys both going in with Edison and Allison at the start of last season. It seems great value in the cheaper goalkeepers with save points. Has your opinion changed? Yes, is the answer to that.
Next question. It depends on the pricing again next year. What we want is someone that's going to be accessible early on at around about that same value, 6.5. And if even if say Pope or Henderson were only to increase by say 0.2 or 0.3, I think you're just going with one of them again. And it just sit there, leave it, it will cover your capacity. Particularly if one of them at the start, say Sheffield United have a single game day and Henderson's only 6.8, we're all starting with him.
Yeah. James, transfer strategy. This is coming in from James Wood, who asked the question. And he wants to know, is there a strategy that should guide transfer use from the start of the season, i.e. 1 a week run rate, or is there a way to optimize captains and bounce around to save transfers for later in the season?
I still firmly believe, look, come after lockdown, I was certainly at an advantage having 14 transfers left or whatever I had, but I still don't think it's the advantage that it would have been had we ended up with proper blank and double game weeks and had that leaning in to really power in and have 3-1s over people, because there just wasn't those advantages to make those jumps or gains. It really became about making moves and just getting one extra game. I do think leaving a good sizable chunk of transfers left to the end is how I'll go again next year. The one major change for me would be being more aggressive early on and not letting things go by when there was a couple of obvious ones, particularly like an Aubameyang 3-for-1 pre-overhaul. And I just should have absolutely pulled the trigger on it, but I was so insistent and preset. No, I'm getting to that overhaul with no transfers. I suspect next season is going to be very different from that perspective. And you might find quite a lot of people burning transfers quite early. 1 per week is a decent ratio. Of course it is. It's worth saying, people think, oh, it's only 40 transfers. But actually, how many transfers did you make in FPL last year, Suj? Was it 35?
35, give or take, yeah.
There you go, right? So it's more than 1 per game week, essentially. You've got a couple of overhauls to throw in there. It's not as bad as it sounds. But I think there isn't right or wrong. Everybody will play it their own way. But I would want to be getting to Christmas probably with 25 left, I think. And I think a lot of people listening to that will go, James, that's too many. I only used about 3 up until November, I think. That's where a little bit too much. I want to make a few earlier changes next year. I think one of them transfers was Timu Pukki. I wasn't taking advantage of premiums in the early part of the season. 2
more questions left for us, James. The first one is easier said. Is an easier answer than the other. FPL Canal, our stats man, who I'm hoping I might be able to see when I go down to Cornwall at the end of August. How likely are you to start next season with, drum roll, James Ward-Prowse?
About 1%.
I have no idea why James Ward-Prowse has popped up in conversation.
Maybe there's one for usage, because we know you've got a bit of a love-in with James Ward-Prowse.
Oh, we like James Ward-Prowse, but he didn't particularly prove himself to be any anything special in
There's a
Sky?
number of Southampton options I would have my eye on. It's all very price dependent. Danny Ings is going to take a jump next year. There's no doubt about it. I think you'll probably see his price and go, no, thank you. Che Adams could be a really good, cheap alternative. Could be next year's Danny Ings. Stuart Armstrong in midfield. Nathan Redmond never gets the returns that he should. Oriol Romeo, if Højbjerg leaves and the midfielders are a lot cheaper, could be one for tackle bonus possibly. And even some of the defensive ones, I feel like it's the sort of club you might get like Kyle Walker-Peters, for example, at a really cheap price. He's that sort of player where they might be a bit unsure. You know there's going to be a couple out there who are going to be cheaper than we expect. And it might be someone like that falls in around about 6 million or so, and it'll be worth sticking in. So James Ward-Prowse would probably fall down to about 8th on my list of Southampton players I'd have my eye on. He doesn't hit the tiering, no, to be frank.
No, he doesn't. 130 points last season is not enough. Not enough at all. And last but not least, James, and to everybody that's asked questions about what are the rules and give us some tips and advice, it's all coming over the course of the summer. So don't worry that we haven't got into that much detail. Next week will be the start point of our Sky. I won't call it tutorials because who are we to teach, but, giving you our knowledge that we have.
We are not the experts. But we probably, having learnt from one season, we're in a good place to brief other people because we still feel new to it.
Exactly. This leads well onto a question from a certain Newcastle correspondent, FPO_footballer. Based on your enthusiasm for the game, I'm going to play next season after playing once in 17-18 and not taking it seriously. The question is, how do you attack both games, FPO and Sky, without confirmation bias or avoiding the same picks, wrecking both your teams?
Well, Van Dijk is a great example of that in terms of amazing Sky asset, good FPO asset. De Bruyne, amazing FPO asset, amazing Sky asset, however you look at it, right? So it's another one. I wouldn't think, I'm not putting De Bruyne in my Sky team because he's a set and forget captain in FPL, if that was my opinion. No, they're both going in. And there's a lot of players that will obviously appeal in Sky who wouldn't appeal to me in FPL, for example. I mean, Ricardo Pereira is a good FPL asset, a very good FPL asset. He's potentially, if he's fit, he's an incredible Sky asset because, I mean, he's finished one off top tier tackles despite not playing since about game week 25 or something. He's incredible numbers, Ricardo Pereira, on tackles.
So I think the answer to Sai's question here a little bit is that you need the first season, in my opinion, to figure it out because you'll make decisions based on certain opinions that you have. I'm going to make this decision for this reason or that decision on that player for that reason. You don't know if it works or doesn't work until it plays out in reality and you see, okay, I bought that player because I thought he was going to get tackle tiers. Did it happen? Did it not? So you need a season, in my opinion, to adjust your mindset and then learn what worked and didn't work for you because you can only do that based on the real life situations playing out. You can't relive last season, unfortunately. It's not like Champ Man, you restart the game. So I think you need the season to readjust your mind. And there's no shortcut to that. As much as you'll listen to our podcasts, I don't think there is a shortcut to it. And eventually you get to the point where, like Jared Bowen is a great example. When you started reeling out the tier points that boy was getting for shots and tackles,
he didn't do fuck all afterwards.
Yeah, he didn't. But the logic was very good at the point, right? You'd think Jared Bowen hasn't got that many attacking returns, but he still was getting reasonable amount of points at the time. So yeah, I think it just takes a little bit of time to adjust, and you can't shortcut that.
I'll make this very clear, and I've made this clear on other podcasts previously. I am far more looking forward to the restart of this than FPL.
There we go. And on that bombshell, James,
just change my handle to Planet Sky FF, which we do every Wednesday anyway.
Yeah.
Should I actually start doing that? Just every Wednesday, actually change it to Planet Sky FF.
Just for one day only.
Yeah.
You can do. You can't change your handle, but you can change your name.
I might do it next Wednesday in the profile. I'll just change it next Wednesday.
See what people say. Yeah, there we go. Everybody who's listening, thank you for tuning in on a little wrap up on the Sky season. And we're going to be bringing you plenty more in the coming weeks. If you want all of the exclusive Patreon podcasts as well, head over to patreon.com/Planet FPL, where we do have tiers that you can sign up for. Wait a couple of days until the 1st of August because you'll save yourself a few quid if you are going to sign up to Patreon. But if you do sign up before the 31st of August, you'll also get September for free. So there's an added incentive to do that. Indeed. So there we go. Wherever you're listening to the podcast, or if you are on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We'll be back at you tomorrow with another FPL podcast. And that's it, James. Anything else to add?
No, thank you very much for helping to guide us through this season to the Sky players. A few big shout outs just before we go. Joe and Luke at Scout, the Hub Boys, Will Thomas, Dan Cox, Paul McNaughty, Andrew Ferguson, of course, Paul Jones at Sky Play and FPL, everybody in the Slack channel who's playing Sky, all the patrons doing that, anybody that's given positive feedback next season. But the only week we'll not be doing Sky until the restart is August the 12th, as we're taking a little break. Other than that, every Wednesday we'll keep going.
Indeed, we will. So as always, guys, stay safe. Ciao for now.
Cue music, please, man. Sharp.